Ladies and gentlemen, let's slow this down and really talk about what just happened in Indianapolis tonight. Because on the surface, this looks like a simple story.
Officials were in the last game. She just looked like she got poked in the eye, maybe right there.
Ai checking in for Nigeria.
That's what I'm talking about right there. Get it. That's it. She could have passed it to Shatori Walker-Kimbrough in front of her. Instead, she threw off to help on a driver that you know has to finish at the rim.
Oh, look at Boston, brings the ball up the floor and then takes it in herself off the Caitlin Clarkson. Clark surveying, backdoor pass, beautiful find to Cunningham.
How many backdoors is that already? I mean, a couple from...
A preseason game, a blowout, a dominant performance by the Indiana Fever against the Nigerian national team. Third preseason game of the summer. Final score, 105-57. Move along, nothing to see here, right? Wrong. If you watched this game and walked away thinking it was just a meaningless exhibition, you were not paying close enough attention. Because underneath that 48-point margin, underneath the highlight reel plays and the efficient shooting percentages and the crowd reactions, there is a team with real structural questions that need real structural answers before the regular season begins. And if those answers do not come quickly, if this coaching staff does not address what was exposed tonight alongside everything that looked good, then that beautiful final score is going to feel like a mirage when the games start counting. So let's break this down properly. Let's go layer by layer, because this game deserves more than a scoreboard glance and a social media recap. This game deserves a real conversation. We start where we have to start. We start with the obvious. Indiana Fever dominated Nigeria from the opening minutes. It was not competitive. It was not a back-and-forth contest. It was not the kind of game where momentum swung and both sides traded punches. It was lopsided almost immediately. By the time halftime arrived, the Fever were approaching 80 points. Think about that. 80 points by halftime. That scoreline looked like something out of a Knicks game on a bad night. That is how pronounced the gap was between these two rosters. The mismatch was so visible, so consistent, so relentless that at times it became genuinely uncomfortable to watch. Not because Indiana did anything wrong, but because it almost felt like the matchup itself had no business being scheduled at this level. That is not disrespect toward Nigeria. That is the reality of where that program stands relative to a WNBA roster loaded with professional talent and depth. Two different tiers. Two completely different levels of competition. And Indiana, to their credit, handled their business. They scored efficiently. They executed offensively. They pushed the pace. They knocked down shots from the perimeter. They rotated the roster. They got multiple players meaningful minutes. They did what a professional team is supposed to do against significantly outmatched competition. But here is where this gets complicated. Here is where the smart viewer separates themselves from the casual one. If you watch this game only through the lens of the final score, you missed the most important story of the night. Because tucked inside that dominant performance, buried underneath the points and the highlights and the easy layups, was a problem that did not go away just because Indiana won by 48. A problem that has shown up before. A problem that is going to become a genuine liability the moment Indiana faces a team that can actually exploit it. That problem is rebounding, specifically defensive rebounding, and at times offensive rebounding too. This is not a new observation. This is not a headline being manufactured to create drama around an otherwise clean performance. This is a real, recurring, observable pattern that has shown up in this team's preseason work. And tonight, even against a Nigerian squad that was overwhelmed on virtually every other statistical category, the rebounding lapses appeared again. Missed box outs, late rotations, second chance opportunities surrendered when they should not have been surrendered. Moments where the defensive glass was treated as an afterthought rather than a priority. It happened multiple times throughout the course of this game. Now, against Nigeria, those mistakes did not turn into momentum shifts. Against Nigeria, those surrendered offensive rebounds did not become a factor in the outcome. The talent gap was simply too wide for those lapses to matter in the final score. But let's be very clear about something right now. The season opener is not against Nigeria. The games that define this team's season are not going to be played against a program that got outscored by nearly 50 points in a preseason exhibition. When Indiana steps onto the floor against legitimate WNBA competition, against physical front courts with size and length and the athleticism to punish every missed box out, those rebounding lapses are not going to disappear into a 48-point margin. They are going to show up in the box score. They are going to show up in extended possessions. They are going to show up in free throw attempts. They are going to show up in momentum swings that cost this team games they should win. Stephanie White has to fix this before opening night. That is not optional. That is not a suggestion. That is a necessity. Because here is the equation. Missed defensive rebound leads to extended possession. Extended possession leads to extra shot attempts. Extra shot attempts lead to foul trouble. Foul trouble leads to your key players sitting on the bench in the fourth quarter. And suddenly, a game Indiana should control turns into a battle of attrition. They are not equipped to win. That is the pipeline that rebounding negligence creates. That is the downstream consequence of treating the glass as a secondary priority. So that concern stands. That concern is real. And that is the headline underneath the headline of tonight's performance. Now, let's talk about what actually went right. And a lot went right. Let's start with the one name that always has to come first. Caitlin Clark. She played 13 minutes tonight, 13 minutes. In that window of time, she put up 12 points on 3 of 4 shooting from the field, 2 of 3 from the three-point line, perfect from the free throw line, efficient, controlled, and sharp in every way that matters. But the stat line is not even the most interesting part of her performance tonight. The most interesting part was the authority. There was a moment during this game that people are going to be talking about for days. Caitlin Clark looked directly at a referee and signaled clearly and assertively for a foul call. Not in a pleading way, not in a timid rookie way. In the way that a player signals when they know the rules, they know what happened on the floor, and they expect the officiating crew to do their job. The foul was not called on the first instance. So what did Clark do? She went right back to work, drew the same type of contact on the very next play, and this time, the call came. Some people are going to have a problem with that. Some are going to say she was working the officials. Some are going to find fault in the arm angle or the body positioning and debate whether the contact was actually a foul. Here is the reality. She was fouled. She knew she was fouled. She made sure the referee understood she knew she was fouled. And then she converted. That is not entitlement. That is a professional basketball player demanding accountability from the officiating crew. That is exactly what every veteran in this league does when they have established themselves. And the fact that Clark is doing it now in a preseason game with that level of composure and confidence tells you everything about where her mindset is heading into this season. She is not playing scared. She is not playing passive. She is playing like someone who understands her role and is done waiting for permission to occupy it fully. And then, just to punctuate the moment, she went down and knocked down a tough 4-point play off the dribble. Pull up. Contact, bucket, free throw, nasty finish, the kind of play that reminds everyone in the building exactly why the conversation around this league changed the moment she stepped onto a professional court. She heard the criticism this offseason about her shot, about her ability to create off the dribble, about whether the tools that made her a generational talent at the college level would translate consistently at this stage. She heard all of it. And if this game was her early response to that noise, the message was clear. She is locked in, and she is not interested in playing at anything less than full throttle. Now let's move through the rest of this roster, because the individual performances tonight deserve their own attention. Kelsey Mitchell was a problem. 17 points on 6 of 9 from the field, 3 of 3 from the three-point line, 2 of 2 from the free throw stripe. She was efficient, she was assertive, and she was nearly impossible to contain when she got moving downhill. There is a reason some people find it almost impossible to believe she does not consistently appear in top 10 conversations when analysts discuss the best scorers in this league. Because when Kelsey Mitchell is feeling it, defenders are simply reacting. They are not guarding her, they are chasing her. And tonight, she looked like someone with a lot to prove heading into this season. Monique Billings showed up in a meaningful way. 7 points, 3 of 3 from the field, 1 of 1 from the three-point line. A perfect shooting night. She shot 100% from beyond the arc. She was efficient with her minutes and gave this team exactly what they needed from her role. Now let's talk about Ty Harris, because tonight felt like something of a breakthrough moment. For much of the early preseason, Harris had not fully found her footing. The rhythm was not quite there, the assertiveness was not consistently present, but in this game, something looked different. She attacked, she created, she found her groove and played with the kind of confidence you want to see from a player carving out a meaningful role on a contending roster. It was the kind of performance that makes a coaching staff take notice. It was the kind of showing that says loudly and clearly that Ty Harris is going to be a factor this season. And then there is Raven Johnson. And this might be the most fascinating subplot to come out of tonight's game. All offseason, there were real questions about Raven Johnson's defensive ability, real substantive concerns about whether she could hold her own at this level on that end of the floor, whether she could be trusted with meaningful minutes, whether she could translate her energy into actual defensive production against professional caliber competition. Tonight, she gave a very clear answer. 7 rebounds, active positioning, smart rotations, pressure and energy that was visible from the opening minutes of her time on the floor. The commentators noticed, the people watching noticed, and here is the most striking part of her performance. She looked legitimately and genuinely like she is about to push for backup duties behind Caitlin Clark. Think about what that means for this team schematically. You can run Clark and Johnson on the floor simultaneously in small ball lineups. You can use Johnson to initiate while Clark works off the ball. You can create defensive matchup problems while maintaining offensive spacing. The versatility that Johnson brings, if tonight was any indication of where she is headed, gives Stephanie White options that she may not have fully had access to before. There are so many different schemes and plays available to this coaching staff right now, and Johnson's emergence is a major piece of that flexibility. Damiris Dantas made her presence felt from the perimeter, connecting on timely threes and providing the floor spacing that this offense needs to function at its highest level. Sophie Cunningham got her run tonight as well, putting up 8 points in just 12 minutes of action. 3 of 4 from the floor, 1 of 2 from the three-point line. Quality, efficient minutes from a player who can give this team real contributions off the bench. And then there is Aaliyah Boston. Her preseason debut was one of the major storylines heading into tonight's game. She had been out. Fans had been waiting. The question of when she would return to the floor and what she would look like when she did was circling this team for weeks. The answer? Solid. Genuinely solid. There were moments of sluggishness, which is completely understandable and completely expected from a player returning to game action after time away. The timing is not always there immediately. The rhythm takes a few possessions to settle in. The conditioning requires real game minutes to sharpen, but the fundamentals were there. The positioning was sound. The instincts were present. She finished with 6 assists and looked like a player who simply needs game reps and floor time to get fully back to where she is capable of being. There is nothing alarming in what Boston showed tonight. There is only the natural process of a player finding her footing after a layoff. She just needs to get her legs underneath her, and when she does, this team gets significantly more dangerous. The final score was 105-57. The Indiana Fever blew this team out of the water completely and thoroughly. Multiple contributors, balanced scoring, efficient shooting across the rotation. But here is something else that deserves mention tonight, and it is not a comfortable conversation. The arena was empty. Not slightly under capacity, not missing a few hundred fans. Noticeably, visibly, obviously empty. Now, there is a version of this conversation where we explain it away. It is the preseason. It is a game against Nigeria. It is not a marquee regular season matchup. These are all true statements and they carry real weight. But Caitlin Clark was on the floor, even for 13 minutes, even in a preseason exhibition against a team clearly overmatched. You would think that the player who single-handedly transformed the attendance conversation for this entire league would have driven more bodies into that building. You would think that the cultural phenomenon that Clark has become, the conversations she has driven, the interest she has generated, would translate into a packed house even for a preseason tune-up, but it did not. And that is worth noting, not as a crisis, but as a data point, because the work of building and sustaining an audience does not stop in the regular season. It requires constant energy, constant momentum, and empty seats, even in preseason, send a message that should not be ignored. The next anticipated full appearance is May 9th. That is when we should expect to see Clark going full throttle. That is the game that will tell us much more about where this team's energy and public profile actually stands heading into the season. So where does all of this leave us? Indiana Fever won tonight decisively. They were dominant, they were efficient, they showed depth, they showed versatility, they showed offensive firepower that will genuinely frighten opposing coaches when the schedule starts to matter. Clark was sharp and assertive. Mitchell was a scoring force. Johnson was a revelation. Harris broke through. Billings shot perfectly. Cunningham contributed. Boston returned. Dantas spaced the floor. The pieces are there. The talent is real. The ceiling of this team, when everything is working the way it is capable of working, is genuinely high. But the rebounding cannot continue to be an afterthought. It cannot be explained away by pointing to the final score. It cannot be buried under the highlight reel. It has to be addressed directly, specifically, and urgently before opening night, because the regular season does not forgive the same mistakes that a 48-point blowout margin allows you to get away with. This is the moment. This is the window. These are the preseason games that exist precisely so that coaching staffs can identify the cracks in the foundation and seal them before the walls start shaking. The Fever have the talent to be something special this season, but talent without discipline on the glass is an incomplete product. Fix the rebounding, maintain the offensive efficiency, keep the emerging players in rhythm, get Boston fully back to form. And then, when the lights get brighter and the opponents get tougher and the stakes get real, this team will be ready to answer every single question asked of them. Tonight was a statement of potential. What comes next determines whether that potential becomes something permanent. The season is coming. The clock is running. And the Indiana Fever have work to do. Let's see if they do it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you saw tonight. Tell me whether you think the rebounding concern is real or whether you think the Fever are going to figure it out before things get serious. Make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe because this season is going to give us plenty more to talk about and we are just getting started.